Tonight we're sitting with narrator Steven Jay Cohen. Welcome to the show.
Welcome to the show.
Yeah, welcome to the show.
So, Steven, tell us a little bit about yourself. What does a normal day for you look like?
Oh boy, so a normal day. Well, I guess it would be a cop-out answer to say there are no normal days. So my studio is not in my house. It used to be in my house. I live in the Berkshires in Western Massachusetts, and there's a lot of old mill buildings out here. And when I decided I wanted to get the studio out of the house, office space in the mill buildings are relatively cheap. And this one used to be a button mill, and it got converted into office space in this one suite. They were renting out individual offices. So I've got a bookstore next door to me, and I have a therapist over there and all this other stuff. So for me, a typical day is I wake up in the morning, I listen to a couple of podcasts, I take my walk out, I get a cup of coffee, I come to the office. I try to record in the mornings instead of the afternoons. And because once I sort of get into email, I'll lose track of time. So, I'll work my way through a project, try to get 2 to 3 hours of recorded audio done, and then I'll shift over into doing other work. And today, after stuff like that, I'm talking to you. So a typical day will start off with working on a project, then, something that I'm hired to narrate. Like this is a book for Tantor Audio. It's actually the second For Dummies book they've asked me to record. And recording an audiobook for a For Dummies book is kind of an odd thing if you think about it, because you don't usually read them from beginning to end. But what I love about narrating them is, even though there's hundreds of different authors, they have a really specific tight set of editorial standards. So you know that you're getting good information in little bite-sized chunks, and they're always a little bit snarky, which is kind of fun because you wind up with these lists and then you get something snarky thrown into the list. So, it's kind of a fun breakup, to break up doing like heavy fiction or something else to then do a For Dummies book. It was just kind of a cool, fun thing to do. And I've got a couple more days on that one. And then, it's doing the stuff for Spoken Realms, which where I help other people do production and self-produce some pieces. And then some of the other emails were about some in-house projects that we're developing for next year. And then this, and then after this, the APA thing tonight. So not untypical.
Busy guy.
I
Yeah.
was gonna say that sounds like a normal day, right? Not an abnormal day.
Yeah, that's pretty normal. You throw in the things with 19-year-old children saying, "Hey, can you drive me here?" Or oh my gosh, the college I was looking to transfer to, the due date to get everything in is yesterday. Things like that. You throw those into the mix, and then it's pretty typical.
Right on. Do you have a favorite genre to record?
Oh man, it's been evolving and changing. So if I listen to what people saying, which things that they've liked, because it's one of those weird things. It's like you're asking me to say which of my children I've liked the best. But the things that come back are, I would love to get to do some more courtroom dramas. I've gotten some really good feedback on the ones of those I've done. I just finished up a mystery that's going to be coming out soon. And so police procedurals are a lot of fun there as well. I've been enjoying doing some magical realism pieces. And some of these have been darker, which has been interesting. I've gotten to sort of pull out that first person Boston and then that first person New Yorker voice to do a couple of things recently, which has been kind of fun to do. So I don't know that there's a particular genre, but what I'm enjoying is I'm enjoying moving back and forth between them.
It sounds a little bit like what you and I talked about, Paul, with reading too. We got to jump around, or it just gets exhausting after a little while. So
Absolutely.
We understand that you're a writer, a voice actor, and an audio engineer. What came first, and how did it evolve into all
Oh
three?
my gosh. So what came first is difficult because I've been acting all my life, and I got my first typewriter when I was 8. So, to say I've been writing and acting my whole life, but what have I been doing? So my first training was as an actor. And as opposed to a lot of actors in New York, because I was born and raised in Brooklyn and worked in New York, a lot of actors would have as a day job, waiting tables, driving cabs, something like that. For me, my day job was doing lighting and sound in theaters around New York. So I was either on stage or backstage. So so for me, the sound work goes back that far. And then sometimes, you've seen a lot of the writing grew out of the acting, sort of understanding things. And as you develop some deeper understandings, you're starting to stage other people's work, other people's plays than your own. And I've been sort of coming in and out of this, doing other things to make more money at times, and winding my way back into this over the years. So my undergraduate work was in theater, my graduate work was in education, but it was in using theater as a teaching modality at NYU. So even that was still sort of theater focused, using theater as a way to teach in subject area. So then I kind of like worked in and out and kind of came back through to this. And when I wasn't doing this work so much professionally, because I needed to make more money than I was able to make at the time that way, I would do these things and do fan works. In fact, if you type my name in and look up fan fiction, you'll find a couple of seasons of Doctor Who out there that I've written that were pulled together by a group called Broken Sea. And quite a few, and there's actually a fair representation of people who've acted for Broken Sea who are now making their living as audiobook narrators.
Oh, wow.
Chris Barnes,
Oh,
and Fiona Thrale, and I could keep going. It's like, I've got to think my way through. But there's a few of us who are around, which is kind of interesting to sort of see that evolution, because that group kind of spawned, and I'll get the history incorrect because I came in close to the end of it, but they were very closely connected with another group that was doing very professional work at the time called Darker Projects. And Broken Sea sort of split off from Darker Projects at an interesting point in history, but there was this real nexus of talent that had all come together. And some really wonderful, creative, original shows were coming out of there. And then the fan fiction was being written as a way to draw in new listeners. You'd show up because you were jonesing for the next Doctor Who, but then you'd find these other new shows, this original content they had done.
Oh, very cool.
So that was really the thought and the structure there. Use the fan fiction as the hook and then get people to listen to some of the original content. Kind of did that and moved my way back in through here, which has been kind of fun. And it's been fun to watch the technology change through the time as well. Because of course, when I started doing this, I was up at Symphony Space in New York with a 5-second delay and a live actor up on stage, and needing to, like a compressor and an equalizer to me are big boxes that sit, there with the delay. And I've got to make sure that the audio is all set to go out on the network wire. So it's a different world from what it was back then. But yeah, that's sort of my weird little circuitous route. I've been kind of orbiting doing this kind of work in different forms the entire time.
Very cool. That's really interesting.
great way to keep it fresh, like we were talking about. So correct me if I'm wrong, Steven, but you're also a narration or voice coach, correct?
I coach from time to time, and so I've done some coaching with Edge Studio and with the Global Voice Acting Academy. I was just one of the coaches at a retreat that Johnny Heller pulled together in Rhode Island. I do some of those things from time to time. But I really feel like I need to keep in the work as opposed to focusing on, on that other piece out there. I like getting the chance to do that, in part because I miss directing. And so what I feel like the most valuable thing I can share as a coach are methods of self-direction. Because, when you're sitting by yourself in the booth, being able, you're really it. You're the, you're the director, you're the cinematographer, you're the entire cast, and you've got this movie that is only going to be played on somebody's imagination, and you've got to make all these decisions in the moment. And so, yeah, so what I like to focus on are self-directing techniques.
Fascinating. All right.
That is fascinating.
It's all the things that you, as a listener, don't even really think about. You're just listening to a good story, hopefully, being told.
Yeah, so there's lots of different schools of acting, but there's one that I keep coming back to when I talk about this. And I don't know, have you talked to James Foster yet?
Yes.
All right, so James and I had this interesting conversation because my drama and education program at NYU is very similar to what he does with Fostering Voices, which is more of a drama therapy kind of point of view of things, but they come at it from the same point in acting. Sanford Meisner was one of the original members of the group theater, and method acting in the United States, or as we know it really today in the world, kind of comes out of some things that grew out of the group theater. And Sanford Meisner's take on the method is really to work with yourself to have a genuine response to an artificial stimulus, right? So we know that whatever I'm currently reading in the book isn't actually happening. But all of the work that an actor does when they work with that technique are about mining for what your true emotional response is. So if you're at a point in the book, even if you're the narration voice, right, and something really tragic happens, you need to figure out how much of that you're going to let come through into your narrator voice, much less the character, right? You don't want to overplay it because I want to leave you space to have your own reaction. I don't want to do the emoting for you, but I do need to have a reaction in that moment, because if I don't, then, it might as well be a computer doing my job.
Yeah. Well, that kind of went right into my next question. Was you answered this as a coach, but as maybe another narrator, what's the best single piece of advice you can get a new narrator?
Take your time. And that applies to a lot of different things. That applies to your pacing. It's the thing that Johnny likes to say in a funny way is we're paid by the finished hour, so you're working against yourself to speed up the book. And which it's funny, but it's partially the truth. You need to give yourself the time to have an emotional response in the moment. You also take your time is also don't necessarily grab every book you're offered in the beginning. Think about how they will reflect upon you later on. Everything that you do is reflective of you in your portfolio. Take your time. Don't rush things. You'll start to work with one publisher, and you'll want to work with another one, and it'll take some time for you to build. So everything comes back to take your time.
That's perfect. I love it.
That's great. It's great advice for anyone, really. I mean, we're so rushed anymore that I think that people forget to look at the quality and look at the time it takes to make quality. So I like that. It's great. So you were on a Hulu show?
Oh, yes.
Stephen King, Castle Rock, maybe? Was that what it was?
Yes.
Really?
Yes. So I'm in the Berkshires, as I pointed out. So for those of you who may be geographically deficient, I am in the western edge of Massachusetts, north of New York City. So technically, I am as close to being equidistant as I could be from Boston and New York. All right. So Castle Rock, Maine, of course, does not exist.
Right.
It's created for the show. They chose Orange, Massachusetts to be Castle Rock, Maine. Orange is very much what Castle Rock seems to have supposed to have been. You know, it's a town where all the industry has left. It's kind of economically depressed. It had the right kind of look and feel to it. And so I'm a SAG-AFTRA member. And in one of the regular emails, it said, hey, they're casting near you. And I thought, oh, that'll be a fun way to get out of the booth for a couple of days. And, you know, so I submitted my information, and I went in and I was working on set, which was kind of fun because I don't usually get to do that, because my experience, I've worked on set before, but most of my experience is stage. So I've worked behind the camera more when it's been film, and I so admire the person who can look at a piece of tape beyond the camera and have a deep, heartfelt "I love you" conversation with this tape mark on the wall, and do it beautifully. And they do it for hours because they have to get the lights got to be right and everything. But that wasn't the kind of theater that I grew up doing. I grew up with, it's live theater. Something goes wrong, you continue, you figure out how to work the problem into the show. Tomorrow night we get better. You know, you talk with the other actors, you think, I was off tonight, how did that affect you? And you kind of work with that back and forth. So it's a whole different thing. Being on set was very similar to the whole, you know, watching the actor do that thing. But I wound up talking so much to people who do that work every day. You know, they are every crowd scene filmed in New England. And right. And so what was funny was when they said, so, you know, I haven't seen you here before. I said, yeah, I usually do audiobooks. It became, I was giving an impromptu how to do audiobook workshop. And, you know, like a couple of people were working to get their points so they can get their union card. And I had to explain, yeah, if you do one audiobook for one of the publishers and you're paid your basic rate, you've got your card. So I suddenly had all these people, you know, writing down information. It was kind of fun. But I think I prefer this because there's too much sitting around and waiting. Sissy Spacek is a really nice woman, though. You know, so it was great, you know. So we're filming in the rain. She's under the umbrella. We're talking. And I forgot what she said, but then I happened to mention it was my wife's birthday. So she said, you tell your wife happy birthday from me. You know, okay.
All right.
That's
You know, it was fun. So yeah, so it was fun moving that casket around in the rain. But honestly, I'd rather talk about having done that in the booth if I had to choose.
Well, it's funny you talk about the actors having to speak to a piece of tape. Aren't you similarly doing the same thing? I mean, but it's not being filmed. That's the difference, I think, is that you're also sitting talking to your baffles, probably. I mean,
Yeah. Well, kind of, except the thing is that they only get the dialogue. They don't get the narrative out, right?
Sure.
So they get the conversation, and they have to do that conversation and do it realistically. But then I get to say, you know, Joe started to finger the keys on the desk. And then Joe starts to think about the car accident, which is why his fingers are running down the keys. And the rut in the key is reminding him of the rut in the road. And those may be all the things that actor is holding in their mind while they're staring at the piece of tape. But I get to go through that, whereas, you know, I get to go through that with the help of the director, which, you know, the director being me, the author being the person who got the book together. But I feel like I get that part of it, which is something that I don't think they get. And I'm constantly astonished at the kind of work they get done because I've watched it in pieces. And I think part of that real art is being able to pull those things together and make something that feels cohesive.
So, Steven, talk to us about Spoken Realms. What is it? What's its backstory? Where did it come from?
All right. So I'll do this one linearly. I won't kind of circle around. So we'll get to where it is by going to what started. So your viewers or listeners know what ACX is at this point, or do I need to give a quick overview there?
pretty sure they know what ACX
All right.
is. I mean,
So for anyone who
couple
may
people like
not, you
that.
can, right, anyone who may not, you can find out about it by going to acx.com. ACX stands for the Audiobook Creation Exchange. But before ACX existed, if you wanted to get an audiobook published and distributed, you needed to have a license with a distributor. And I have a license that pre-exists ACX to distribute to Audible. I have another one that I can distribute through Blackstone. So I have these to do in-house production. Like I said, I've been doing like full cast work and other kinds of work for a long time. And the thought was, gee, we're not using these nearly as well as we could, because I'd love to figure out a way to open this up so a lot of people can use them. And I looked at ACX when it came around, and I thought, well, it's really difficult to do something that's a classic, something that's in the public domain without a rights holder on ACX. Why don't we, as a small test project, figure out a way to allow people to do that? And I'm also sort of a part-time programmer, and I've written some software. And so I pulled together this project management system, and people were doing all different sorts of classics. So everything from Huckleberry Finn to Little Women to, you know, almost anything else that you can imagine, where people would grab these public domain pieces and self-produce them. At the time, the business was called Listen to a Book, with the number 2 in there. That grew out of a hashtag that we were using for a promotion, but people just kept saying, yeah, the Listen to a Book guys. So that's what we did. So around that time, a friend of mine looked at what I was doing and he said, hey, I think you're growing a startup. I just did this startup incubator that's a couple of towns over here, and maybe you need to take your little business over to there and see what happens, which I did. And so I took it through a startup accelerator and an incubator, and got a lot of different advice, and we pivoted. We changed the business many times during that process, and part of those changes were eventually the renaming of what it was from Listen to a Book to Spoken Realms. And so even now, we're sort of in the process of executing some of those changes. So as the primary part of the business that people see, which is not really the primary work a day, the stuff that I was talking about before that I'm emailing about, but what most people see are the featured voice productions, which means any of the narrators who are listed on the system as a featured voice, they go out and they find their own jobs when they're doing stuff on ACX, right? Well, what happens if you're on ACX and you connect with an author and you want to bring them to ACX, but you can't use ACX? Like, let's say the author is not from an ACX approved country. You know, they're from Australia, they're from South America, they're from somewhere else, and they can't use ACX. Or what if it's an author who you work with all the time, and you do a royalty share with them all the time, but this time they've written their book and they need 2 narrators, and they still want to do a royalty share. You can't do a royalty share with 2 narrators on ACX. There's no mechanism to pay 3 people and do the split like that. So essentially, the system grew from being just stuff in the public domain to being anything that doesn't fit into an ACX project. So if you think of the square peg and round hole thing, if ACX is the round hole, we built a square hole that people can put their own projects in. So what I really built was a way that a narrator doesn't have to say no to a project just because it can't be done on ACX, and they can still get the project done on their own. Projects produced at Spoken Realm Studios are stuff that we produce in-house in very much the same way that Skyboat Media or Pocket Universe Productions or other people like that do. And this year we signed a contract with the union, so all in-house productions are union productions. Where, you know, a lot of that startup stuff was to get funding, and we'll be producing some full cast work in the next year, as well as a couple of things that'll be a little bit more heavily featured. So we're looking to build that out. And so the business has facets, and what most people think of is it's that thing that's not ACX and not Findaway. Whereas what I sort of look at it as is I built things that don't fit into either of those pieces. It's not a competition like a lot of people are thinking. We each have our own niche, and we're working to fill that niche. I think a lot of people are sort of stuck in the competitor model, and they assume that we're all sort of fighting tooth and nail, when really, Findaway grew out of the wonderful stuff they've done for years behind the scenes that has nothing to do with Findaway Voices. Like most people will remember, if they used to get audiobooks from the library, that at one point you would get something that looked like a CD case, but you'd plug the headphones into that. That was a Playaway audio. And Playaway was a product of Findaway.
Ah.
So their core business has always been moving digital audio from point A to point B, and Findaway Voices is a new venture for them that they started in-house.
Fascinating.
Yeah, so
Yes. Wow.
yeah, we're like, so it's not this big battle as much as it's like, somebody will come to me and they'll say, I've got the finished audio, and I'm like, yeah, then I can't connect you with a narrator, which is part I really like doing. But Kelly would love to distribute this for you. Let me tell you how to contact him. So, it's things like that where we're trying to figure out how to best work with each other to get everything done.
Oh,
I think it's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. I like the non-competition too, because like I'm a big craft beer fan, and that's, people think that they compete, and if you ever talk to any of the brewers and any of the owners, they don't.
Mm-hmm.
They actually collaborate more than they compete, because they're all competing against in this case they're competing against big beer, but
Right.
They're not competing with each other. They want the smaller scene to do well. They want more people to try their beer. So same idea. We want more people to listen to audiobooks. Same reason Paul and I do what I do too. It's just get the reviews out there, get people to understand that it is reading. Like I'll argue with you all day that people say that listening to an audiobook isn't reading. Same idea. Like I'll argue with you, but yeah, I love it. That's great. It's really nice to hear too, because not knowing the connection you guys had, you would think you'd be competitors, which is good to hear you're not, which is great.
Well, it's interesting that it's like when I wind up at a couple of these things, so Johnny Heller and Scott Brick did a business workshop in California, and they had me sort of piped in from here because I was working on a book and I couldn't get away. And they opened it up for me to talk about my business, but I had heard about what they talked about first, and I felt like, wait a minute. We need to clarify this part. So I actually spent a lot of time explaining how people could bring projects to ACX, and how if they were just auditioning for projects on ACX, they were missing more than 60% of the value of the platform. That the real value there is, hi, I connect to you, Brian, and you're an author and I want to do your book, and you've never done an audiobook before. ACX or Findaway or me, we all have contracts and things already set up to make it simple for the narrator and the author to get the job done. But you want to find the best platform for you, and each platform has its advantages and they're slightly different. And so you figure out, where do you want to live in that ecosystem? And the point is, yes, at the end of the day, to reach the listeners, and figuring out where your listeners are, or if you as a rights holder have enough sway to say, hey, don't buy from the big common place that you usually would buy them. Come over to this little lesser known one, because they pay me as the owner a little bit more. And so you could really support my creative endeavors by buying from this other platform. If you have a good enough connection with your readers to do that, then, oh my God, do I have a great distribution method for you to do that, to leverage that so you can create that sort of feedback loop. And that's part of what the difference is between them. ACX's big advantage is that dashboard, that sales dashboard, because if you're an indie author and you're doing some kind of promotion, like you're promoting something on audiobook, on Audiobook Reviewer, and you want to see if that's going to move the sales needle, you do the promotion, you watch the sales dashboard, and if you see it move within a week of it being posted, then you think, okay, that money that I spent for that promotion helped move the book. Now what do we do to refine that? You don't get that kind of feedback from other places, because ACX, being owned by Audible, has access to data that the rest of us don't. And so I think that's the real hidden value inside ACX, that people forget about sometimes.
That sounds like your next software project. I don't know what you're talking about. I was sneaking a peek at those because I actually used way back when I used some of your tools just to play around with.
Oh,
I forgot. I remembered. I went back to say you might be, when I was getting into audiobooks, you might have been genuinely the first site I found, the first narrator I found, which is crazy to me. Like looking back, which was 4 years ago, probably 5 years ago. I remember hearing about the software, and then you said software again, and I had already been kind of sneaking a peek. And I wanted to ask about it, but I heard you say project management, and then I watched Paul shudder because he's not even out of work yet. He's just like, all right, I'm not going to think about that anymore. But.
well, you know, so Paul, assuming, because I don't know Paul's day job, but hearing that comment, I've got an idea. So essentially, the project tracker where we do everything behind the scenes. How we built it was I threw together some really basic things and used a Trello board and did stuff in the beginning to sort of figure out what would work for voice for actors, because actors are harder to corral than programmers. Well, you know,
That's pretty hard then.
Yeah.
I work with programmers all day, so
actors by their nature don't want to think in the kinds of terms that programmers think in. So I started off with a whole big project management system, and I was really open to hearing feedback, and we kept removing and removing and removing. And what I wound up having was a very simple system. People propose the project, we approve the project. They then have a little drop down that says, are they in pre-production, are they recording, are they in post, or are they ready to upload? The only other thing they've got in there, aside from control of the title and all of that, is do they want to get alerts? You know, do you want an email saying your project is due in 2 weeks? And what is the due date, by the way? Because since we're putting, you know, people are fitting these projects in typically between other projects for other people, they shift dates all the time. So that's all that the actor needs to manage, which is when is it due and what am I doing? And then what we get on the back end is it fills out a calendar. So I've got a calendar feed and it says to me, and I see all the books. So I've got the calendar feed. So we know that this week we're going to get slammed because we're coming up on the holidays and there's all these books coming due. So I better, you know, like cut back on the recording session so we can get stuff done. Or, gee, you know, this is really wide open. Now we can bring other things in. So we get the information that we need, which turned out to be very minimal. They don't feel like they're being overmanaged because they only have to change it. Okay, now I've started recording. And then they update like how they want to be paid. You know, so that's about it. You know, you can't imagine a simpler project management tool than that, but it actually goes all the way from the initial contract through the production, through paying them quarterly royalties. You go back to the whole startup incubator piece, you know, so part of our IP is that software. We've had a couple of requests to implement it or versions of it for other people. And we'll probably be refactoring it maybe the end, second quarter of next year. But you know, it's reached stable, and we know that, you know, and it's basically written in almost pure PHP with little bits of JavaScript here and there. So it's a really simple application, you know, business logic, display logic, all the fun things. We could turn this into that kind of a geek show if you want.
I mean, you're right up my alley. That's what I do all day at work. So that's. But I'll pivot for you. I'll even use another startup, and I'll pivot for you.
Okay.
So, are you an audiobook listener yourself? If
yes.
Yes, what are you listening to right now?
What am I listening to right now? Okay.
Other than Paul and I talking about project management stuff.
No, I want to pop open my app. I want to pop open the Audible app because my daughter and I were having a conversation, and we trade recommendations. So I was about to start. I was about to start The Whiz Mob and the Grenadine Kid. which was narrated by Bronson Pinchot, who's a wonderful narrator.
Mhm.
And you may remember Balky from Perfect Strangers.
Oh yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. So I was just about to do that. But I have not started that yet, which is why I had to look back up what it was called. Before that, I had actually realized I had never listened to Lenny Henry's version of Anansi Boys by Neil Gaiman. And so I had actually just finished that, which was wonderful, in part because Neil Gaiman, when he writes, he reads everything out loud, which means one of the challenges for a narrator when it's not Neil Gaiman is to not sound like Neil Gaiman reading it. And it's really kind of interesting because Lenny Henry has a very different cadence, but what's very funny is in like chapters 1 and 2, you almost hear him leaning into the Neil Gaiman-ness of the first chapter or so, and then slowly bringing the listener with him back to Lenny Henry land, which is kind of a fun thing.
Yeah, keep the people that were used to Neil Gaiman, but then kind of let them ease into your style.
Exactly.
That's interesting. So how about some of your favorite audiobooks of all time?
Ooh, so there's a few Simon Vances on there. And one of them would be The Prestige, which I think was so much better as some people love the movie of it, but I feel like the movie leaves out so much of what I loved in the book. I'm one of those, the book was better people. And the book, in the case of The Prestige, has a story within a story within a story, and you lose that part of it in the movie. And Simon's just so wonderful at creating a way for you to know which layer of reality you are in as he is reading. And I don't know how he does that. Another Simon Vance would be 13 Hours, which is this wonderful story set in South Africa. And he goes from being this Afrikaans police lieutenant to the Tosa investigator and back and forth. And the accents are so spot on. They're just wonderful to listen to as he moves back and forth. I'll mention him one more time, but I wanted to hear a multi-narrator piece. And one of my favorite writers of all time is, great, now I'm going to forget everything as I'm trying to do this. But the book is A Long Way Down, and Nick Hornby. Nick Hornby wrote A Long Way Down, and it was narrated by Scott Brick, Simon Vance, and Kate Redding. And it was it's a great
cast, a big good cast.
Right.
Yeah, and I love Nick Hornby stories. They just feel very real to me, and so that was definitely one of my favorites. And I'm accidentally downloading a book. And there's a lot of people who don't like listening to celebrity reads, but there's one that actually caused me to pull over and have to actually let myself cry for a little bit before continuing. So I want to bring it up. David Tennant is a wonderful audiobook narrator. He tends to get, he's done things like How to Train Your Dragon, but in this case, this is I don't know if this counts as YA or if this counts as children's fiction. The book is called My Sister Lives on the Mantelpiece. And it's about a young boy who lost his sister in a bombing in the UK. And the bombing was connected to Islamic terrorism. The family slowly falls apart, and the kid, they move to a new town, and there's this Pakistani girl in his class, and she's very nice. And you totally get that he's the little boy who's trying to reconcile, these people killed my sister. She's I can't fit these two things in my brain, and he does it so beautifully. It was just wonderful. So much so that I went looking for other things he narrated. And I'd also have to recommend, if you ever want to listen to a James Bond, you can't do better than him reading On Her Majesty's Secret Service. all wonderful, wonderful pieces. A lot of fun.
I just read the opening 3 sentences to the synopsis of My Sister Lives on the Mantelpiece, and I want to start crying. Holy cow.
Yeah. Well, so he's a very literate little boy. He likes reading, he likes reading. And so when he's talking about not having, feeling very cut off from his emotions, he uses a Narnia reference, and he says, it feels like it's winter but never Christmas. And I'm sitting there, and this is just at the perfect point in the book, and I pulled over and I just said, okay, I need a minute. I'll drive again in a minute. I'm letting this, no, he got me. Okay. But yeah, one of my very favorite moments.
Wow.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's great. I love it when a book gets to me like that.
Yeah.
Something really powerful going on there. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of our prepared questions. So is there something that you want to have our listeners be on the lookout for?
What I'd like to do is, if it would be okay, I'd like to plug, so anyone who's tracked ACX for a long time knows that the work has changed over time, what's available there. When they first opened their doors, there was a huge backlog, and that's not there anymore. But a lot of people who are narrating now have made connections with writers through that space. And we tend to keep doing their work. In my case, that writer is a man named Richard Levesque. So a couple of things have been reviewed by you all so far. The Somniscient. Boy, I can't remember which ones you guys reviewed and which ones you didn't. But so Richard writes stuff that can be a little pulpy and a little sci-fi, but in this case, so we've done a lot of those stories together, and I think they're wonderful. They're fun stories. He's really a really great writer and an enjoyable read. But there was this one book that he never asked me to do. The book was called Foundlings, and he never said, how about we do this? Now, Foundlings is a story that has to do with someone who lost their family to the Japanese internment camps during World War II. And I'm talking with Richard, and I'm watching politically what's going on this year. And I had also just done a concentration camp book. So I was very deep in the World War II ethos at the moment. And I was watching this whole thing about people not being considered Americans who were born here. And for anyone who doesn't know that part of World War II history, after the Japanese attack, it didn't matter where, if you looked Asian, odds are you were taken to one of the camps in California. And this story kind of walks in that reality, but still has a little bit of science fiction to it and a little bit of pulpiness to it. But he never asked to do it. And so in seeing what was going on, I asked if we could do it. And I then took a lot of time getting those voices as right as I could, and calling people who have way better command of Japanese than I ever will have, and to help me understand not how Japanese sounds necessarily, but when someone who speaks Japanese because they were born speaking Japanese, when they're speaking English, what kinds of things stay in their voice versus what kinds of things tend to go away over time, because I was trying to differentiate characters by how integrated into society they were. So it was, of the things I've done that are fiction, that one is probably, in my opinion, the most important piece that I've done recently. In nonfiction, there's a Fourth Amendment book that I got to do earlier this year by Cyrus Farivar, which is great. Now I don't have the title in front of me, but I did that one earlier this year, and I love this. It's like I've got to go flipping through to find everything. It's wonderful. You're right, habeas data. Habeas data, the rise of surveillance tech, which walk through Fourth Amendment laws in the last 100 years. And really, in the reading of it, it felt like an audiobook length NPR story. But again, your right to privacy is something that is so present in what's going on today. And I felt really honored that in that case, Tantor came to me and asked me to do that book. But those two books, Foundlings and Habeas Data, are definitely the two most important things that I've done. And those are stories that I'm very happy that are out there. And I'm just glad to be a part of them.
Steven, thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy day to talk about audiobooks and stuff with us.
Thank you.
It's been great.
And
one that Paul always forgets that I like to see. Do you have any questions for us?
So here's another and related question. Don't want to take this too far out, but so in looking at the core value that you all add, because you definitely help. So you definitely help in moving the needle, in getting people to understand and getting the conversation started. Have you reached out to any of the booktubers who are open to audiobooks to try to do an exchange of information, or to see if because I feel like the booktubers are, they definitely have a very dedicated following, and there's a few of them who are like, oh my God, my eyes needed a rest. I really dove in and loved listening to this one, and they'll go on like that forever. Not all of them. Some of them are reading by eye purists, but finding the right ones. I really think that you guys would have a great conversation, by combining forces that way.
Wow, I'm gonna have to write that one down, because no, I haven't done anything like that.
I follow quite a few. I haven't actually even looked into if they only do pure reading or anything, but I do follow some booktubers, and I do have I have different Gmail accounts for different projects I do also. So I've got, because of the different Gmail account, I have a different YouTube account related to that. So I can go in and save this podcast. I can save Jeffrey K for doing his audiobook stuff. I can save all the different people who do audiobook stuff and just go in and go, okay, this is my audiobook, or this is my book one. And I have some booktubers saved there. And I follow quite a few on Twitter, and they are a devoted reviewer. They are a devoted, I don't even know, promoter, but they also have, like you said, a devoted group of people that follow them and watch them too.
Right. And they've been very gracious with each other, like getting together and talking. And so I have a feeling that if you find a few who are friendly to audiobooks, that they would love to, they would love you exposing your people to their channel and the other way around.
Oh, absolutely. Because the more people that know, the more people get happy and make money and listen to good stories and all that good stuff.
Yeah, telling stories is core to the human experience, and anything that we can do to share more and more of those, is where the real value is.
100%, absolutely.
I don't think we can end on a better note than that. I mean, that's
no, not at all. So on that note, Steven, thanks again so much.
Thank you, Steven.
Really appreciate